And login information is available on the district website. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the district website as soon as it is possible. Community input is encouraged and welcome. Input must be informational in nature and address the entire board rather than one particular member. The Board of Education cannot engage in discussion or debate in response, but will take the information for review and direct the appropriate district employee to respond. There are two opportunities for community input. One is online. We did receive one community input online. It's been forwarded to all board members, and district administration is working to reach out to that individual. And then I believe we have some guests in our audience. A little piece of coming back to normalcy here. So welcome, because it's been a long time since we had somebody here for community input. So thank you for coming. Typically, individuals get 2 minutes. There's 2 of you. So that, in my opinion, that would be 4 minutes. So come on forward. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us your name and where you live.
My name is Lucas Winskowski. Live on the cloud over by the Mac. I really just kind of wrote this up just to kind of keep it short and sweet. I made 6 copies. There's a little bit more than that of you guys, but I don't know, whichever. But I'll just kind of read it. It says, Board members of District 742, I'd like to tell you about my daughter, a student in District 742, and a little bit about our life. My daughter has been on the honor roll, played in soccer, basketball, and track, and plays a violin and orchestra. Her mother and I are married, and we have lived in the same house for several years, in a neighborhood with 2 entrances, and collection of dues. We eat dinner most nights together, and we discuss our highs, lows, and gratefuls for the day. My daughter doesn't have to worry about food, safety, or shelter. She asks for help from us with her homework, and we keep track of her progress on Skyward. We attend conferences and will communicate with teachers outside of conferences as well. My daughter has attended study sessions online, as well as in person on Fridays for help with classroom material throughout this year. She leaves her classrooms to take her tests to help her focus, and will go to the same room to study when needed throughout her week. She will ask for help from teachers in and out of the classroom, and often develops a relationship with her teachers beyond simply student-teacher. One of her teachers on the last day of school this year called her the sweetest ever. So we gave her a little hard time about that. We have had talks about identity, friends, boundaries, values, anxiety, depression, relationships, and more. She applied for a job the day after returning from vacation on her 14th birthday and started working right away, all by her choice. She has paid for her own driver's education and signed up for Career 1 this summer. We have been members of a church together in this community for nearly 6 years. I'm so proud of my daughter. My daughter is biracial. She does not see herself that way, nor does she see herself as white or black or anything else that might define her by her skin color. I'm writing this letter because my daughter was pulled out of class to attend a group. It was explained to her that this group was part of a new program for colored students, and the leader wanted to hear about their experiences. They were asked 9 questions, all revolving around race and skin color. She explained that she did not share much because she did not relate to a lot of what other students had experienced. One specific question she remembered, and one she commented on, was if she had been treated differently because of her skin color. She did not believe so, but said she was witness to it, and gave an example of seeing staff tell groups of colored students to quiet down when being loud, and not telling an equally loud white group of students the same thing. This, of course, led to more conversations between us, and I asked her why she thought she was not treated like the other colored students. She believed it was because her skin is lighter, and that lighter than some of her classmates. I challenged her and asked if she thought it could be because of the relationship she develops with her teachers or because of how engaged she is in her education. She had never thought of that before. It was heartbreaking to hear my daughter. To hear my daughter believe the only and sole reason she has been treated well by her teachers has been because she had lighter skin. When my daughter brought this up, when my daughter brought up this group, it wasn't the questions, conversations, or reasons for the group that seemed to be any matter, as these things seemed relatively normal to her. In fact, she explained thinking the benefit of the group, and maybe a reason to continue to be a part of it, was because she felt staff were giving students a chance to speak and be heard. And yet the first thing she said was she wasn't sure what she could say to me because she was told to leave the conversations had there for the group. She was brought to this group to discuss being treated differently based on her skin color, while being treated differently based on her color by this group. Understanding white students were not allowed in the group, and therefore these conversations. There are 3 issues I have regarding how these topics are being handled. Firstly, this district, this board, and her school seem so focused on the color of her skin, and it is unacceptable to define her by that or treat her any differently as a result of that. I understand there are racial disparities within our schools. However, this is a broken metric. Things like socioeconomic status, intellectual and cognitive abilities and grades, engagement in and out of our classroom, and behavioral issues all seem a better measure for disparities and barriers, not skin color. Secondly, the A&I and SEL programs talk about a focus of family partnerships, and we have yet to receive any information about this group or about being pulled from class. Anything outside of the curriculum listed on her schedule, anything in that curriculum that is not focused entirely on that subject, or anything that impedes on that curriculum needs to be communicated. Communication and transparency are imperative. Lastly, encouraging my daughter to see everything through a lens of skin color and victimization is not helpful. The issue with filtering everything through this lens is everything is seen through it, including kindness, success, and relationships, as described above from my example that she gave. This is in direct conflict with a dream given to us almost 60 years ago. If I haven't been obvious, I'm not talking only of my daughter or this specific incident. I'm keeping this letter short so the message does not become lost. I'm troubled by the direction this board and this district are choosing to go, the insistence of focusing on skin color. My father, my brother, my oldest daughter are all proud Tech alumni, and I want to see that pride in our community continue with the rest of our children. I understand I'm not asking for something small. This is a tall order. I hope this board will have the courage to continue these conversations that need to happen and fight for what is right for the future of our children. And I just added something else, saying that I'm well aware this letter is coming on the backdrop of what has been going on at Ricori. It saddened me to hear about the recent events that have been taking place. The line between racism and ignorance is often blurred, and our schools do a poor job of providing any clarity. When I ask alumni and current students what they know about the Emancipation Proclamation, 3/5 Compromise, Malcolm X, Black Panthers, the Civil Rights Act of '64, Brown versus Board of Education, Jim Crow laws, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, separate but equal, or anything beyond the name Martin Luther King Jr., at best I've heard of one of those, but couldn't tell you anything about it. But mostly the response is not having ever heard of any of them. We cannot expect, just because I said so, to be sufficient enough for not doing, saying, or believing something. These topics need to be taught, though with an emphasis that our children are not the actors in history, and that today is not then. Using inappropriate analogies or language to describe the people involved in our history, which our students identify with, will do nothing but continue to blur that line and foster bitterness and resentment.
Thank you for feeling comfortable and sharing. We appreciate that. And are you okay then if we have somebody from administration reach out to you to?
I mean, honestly, if you want, I really thought about all the stuff that I put in this letter, and I mean it when I said it's not just about this incident, and it's not just about my daughter. I would be willing to talk to somebody. I hate to be pessimistic. I don't see anything really changing. I do believe that everybody here, including our teachers, mean well. I just don't think it's being well received.
We value your input and your perspective, so thank you for sharing that, and we take your words to heart. So thank you very much, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Madam Chair. I'm not sure if you clarified at the beginning that we could not take questions, take questions, I just
We
wanted.
cannot engage in conversation directly from community input. Is that what you're asking?
No, I was asking, I didn't hear you saying it to him, so I was asking you to say it to him, but he left already. She said it? Okay.
That we
Never
couldn't
mind.
engage in conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah, right before he talked. Yep, okay. Okay, well, this meeting is now called to order. It is 6:44 PM. It is June 2nd, 2021. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today and tomorrow's society. And since Les is not here, Al is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Al. And now can you please call roll?
Yes. Monica Segura Schwartz,
I am here.
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Here.
Shannon Hawes,
Here.
Zach Dorholt. Al Dahlgren is here, Scott Andreasen.
Here.
And the following board member, Dr. Les Green, is not here this evening. The following cabinet members and staff are present at the district administration office. Superintendent Willie Jett, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalarud, Media Technicians, Paul Novak and Gordy Scott, Custodian on site, Steve Hain, and the following cabinet members are virtually present. Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm, Director of Community Engagement and Communications, Tammy DeLand, Director of Equity Services, Ellen Stewart, Executive Director of Human Resources, Tracy Flynn Bowe, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch, Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji. Actually, I saw Gary here in the building, so Gary is here, not virtually. Executive Director of Research, Assessment, and Enrollment, Dr. Sylvia Huff. Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education, Dr. Carol Potter. And Executive Assistant, Jan McGuire.
Thank you. Okay, next up, I'm looking for approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Natalie and a second by Scott. Al, can you please call roll?
Zach Dorholt. Yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
And Al Dahlgren is yes.
Okay, thank you. Next up is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board routinely adopts without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda prior to the consent agenda being moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of personnel staff changes. Item B, approval of monthly treasurer's report. C, approval of monthly financial report. D, approval of board policy 527, student use and parking of motor vehicles, patrols, inspections, and searches, third reading. And item E, McKinley Elevator Project change order for the total of $3,317. Is there any board member that wanted to remove an item from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing no one wants to remove anything, I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda as read.
So move.
I have a motion by Scott and a second by Zach. Al, can you call roll again?
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Al Dahlgren is yes. Zach Dorholt. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. On to discussion and action items. We have 4. First up is an action item, the Board of Education bargaining principles. On the agenda, it says presented by Dr. Les Green, because he is the chair of the Board Personnel and Negotiations Committee. However, he is not able to join us tonight. So I will be presenting in front of you and as well as online. You have the the 2017 that were adopted in 2019 Board of Education bargaining principles in front of you. And then you also have a colored copy with some suggested edits that we adopt tonight. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to review these or if you're familiar with them. We're fortunate that we only have one new board member here, so to catch up to speed. There's 6 items on our bargaining principles: improved learning results, fair compensation within our means, sustainable budgeting and sustainable settlements, open and honest bargaining, public entity to information, and language items is number 6. On the colored copy, the yellow is a suggestion. Yeah, there's,
Not yellow is strike, the green is suggested.
and so the green is adding in, the yellow is taking out. So looking to add in for all students. And then remove the yellow sentence and finish with, we are committed to demonstrating that biennial legislative appropriations are used to achieve the purpose in concrete measurable ways. Does anybody, I guess I'll just go down these 6 here. Does anybody have any thoughts or concerns about item number 1 as suggested? Number 2, fair compensation within our means. District 742 seeks to provide educational programs of recognized excellence. That goal requires us to attract and retrain quality staff and to compensate them appropriately. District 742 is committed to providing the best possible compensation for our employees within the means provided by the state of Minnesota. Increased revenues should be used to foster effective instruction and results for students. Are we good with that one? Okay. Number 3, sustainable budget, sustainable settlements. Our commitment to maintaining quality programs and reasonable class sizes prohibits that we use budget cuts or unsustainable funding sources to fund increased compensation. We cannot increase the total cost of compensation faster than the increase in state funding permits. Cutting programs, thereby hurting students and families, is not an acceptable or effective mechanism to accomplish the objective of funding settlements.
I
Scott?
think that maintaining class size is really important, that we not increase.
Do you like that's how that reads?
I like
Okay.
that.
No changes suggested in open and District 742 is committed to open and honest bargaining with its employees. To this end, we endeavor to provide complete information regarding the state of our budgetary capabilities. We expect also that the representatives of staff who provide accurate information to all their members. Questions? Okay. Number 5, public entitled to information. The decisions that are made in the bargaining context have major public policy implications. For this reason, the public is entitled to regular information on bargaining process and the policy and financial implications of positions of the parties. We're good there? And last, language items. We evaluate language proposals based on the following principles. Proposals must be fully costed and the costs must be included in the costing of the total package. 2, we do not accept language proposals that subject us to costs that cannot be predicted or controlled. 3, all costs of language proposals must be paid out of the year during which they accrue. 4, contract Language should foster a sense of fairness amongst employees and contribute to a positive and supportive work environment. 5, language should be clear and unambiguous. 6, language items that will impact the way we deliver services must be fully vetted through the cabinet and discussed with administration to make sure that it does not interfere with our ability to deliver quality programs. 7, both bargaining partners should work to adopt language items that engenders respect and support for employees within the community and amongst other employees. And 8, our agreements should be consistent with our overriding objective to achieve excellence in learning. So I am looking for a motion then to approve or adopt the Board of Education bargaining principles as the edits are in place here.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion by Natalie and a second by Scott. Is there any further discussion? Okay, Al, can you call roll?
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren is yes, Zach Dorholt. Yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Next up, we have approval of the 2021-2022 Student and Family Handbooks. And I'm a little out of order here. Presented tonight by Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Thank you, Chair Haas. Yes, I'm trying to make sure I accidentally turned off our colleagues on this TV over here. So my apologies. Good evening, Chair Haas, members of the board, Superintendent Jett. I am excited to be able to share our student and family handbooks with you this evening for your approval. You did receive the handbooks ahead of time. I know they're lengthy, so we did provide a summary of changes, but I'd like to just pick, I want to highlight a few of the important changes and give you a brief overview of those. When we are revising our student and family handbooks, our goals specifically this year were to make sure that the language that we use is both inclusive and positive. That our handbook procedures align with board policies and are aligned across level. And we also, the typical updates you can always expect are things, yearly updates, including our assessment calendar and meal prices. So those are important updates that our families can expect. When you take a look at the elementary handbook, there's a few key changes just I want to point out this evening. The first is that we removed the language of 5 tardies equating to 1 day of excused absence, and that was done per county guidance. So that was done to align with Stearns County expectations. Our meals, there was an incorrect statement made in the handbook regarding meals. This is new. This was not in our summary of our overview. Thanks to Al for catching this mistake. So there was a statement in there of old past practice saying that if a student's lunch balance was negative, that we would provide an alternative lunch, and we no longer do that. And so that was removed, and I appreciate that catch. We would never, ever want our families to be concerned about the food that we are providing to their families or to their children. We changed I made it an addition to the spot or the information about hanging posters and signs, and that was to align with our revised board policy 505, just that administration retains sole discretion over what items are hung in our schools. In the summary, the elementary ones showed that we had removed the information about school board meetings and that it was not accurate. The school board meetings remained, and so it is now aligned with the secondary one. And then we did provide additional information about how the public can give input, because we know how important that is, not only to the board, but to our school community. And then the other major change for elementaries was regarding the language regarding visitors to classrooms. And we updated that so that our visitors would know what to expect. And it's specifically regarding that our visitors are asked to bring photo ID, which is not uncommon when scanning into any of our buildings, that we ask for advance notice so that our teachers are aware and can prepare for a visitor, and that they're not allowed to record the conversation or video. And please note, those are separate. That is a separate category from volunteers. This is someone specifically coming to visit, not to volunteer. In the secondary, there are a few key changes. We are now allowing backpacks. We've learned over COVID, one of the lessons we've learned is that backpacks are working just fine in the middle levels. And so, particularly with the addition of replacing the old desks, and so that we can finalize and make consistent our furniture that has a beautiful hook for our backpacks. We are not creating any fire hazards, and so we know that it works quite well. There's an addition to the grading language, just explaining that CNC, and that was the grade that we assigned to the COVID no credit. That's what the CNC stands for. Clarifying what that means versus no credit, just so none of our families are confused about that. And making sure all of our students and families understand that those do need to be made up, that a CNC is in fact no credit, and to graduate students do need to complete that credit. We wanted to clarify for our homeschool students that to have a diploma issued from either Apollo or Tech from St. Cloud Area School District 742, that they need to be enrolled at least 51% of their time with our school district. Otherwise, the family who is homeschooling would be issuing that diploma. And finally, there was an update to the technology. In past iterations, we shared that students using district technology are responsible for their behavior, and we added students or families using our district internet access are equally responsible for their behavior. We wanted to give you a sneak peek of what the cover looks like. We wanted to make sure that it looked like a professional publication, and that in terms of theme and design, it echoed and mirrored other publications that our communications department and our district puts out. So here is the cover of the elementary one. I'm showing you in both English and Spanish, and the secondary one is there in Somali. And I welcome any questions from the board.
Al?
I don't really have any. Had it on the whole time again there. I don't really have any questions, Lori, but I do want to mention that we also discussed having you go back and check the anti-bullying sections in both the elementary and in the high school handbooks, just to make sure that our policy is aligned. We've made some changes to our policies recently, and just to make sure that the policy says the same thing that it says in the handbook. And also on the one that we just changed recently was a medication policy. And I think there was a couple of conflicts there between the handbook and the new policy. So just to take a look at those, but nothing major.
Thank you.
If we are looking to adopt this handbook and something comes up, or is there a concern there? No, okay. Okay. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the 2021-2022 Student and Family Handbooks. Okay, I have a motion by Zach and a second by Scott. Al, can you call roll? About this one.
Okay, let's see, we got Zach Dorhold. Al Dahlgren is yes, Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Natalie Ringsbooth.
Yes.
Shannon Hawes.
Yes, thank you, Al. Okay, next up, another action item. Rescind approval of meal prices for 2021-2022, presented tonight by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, Superintendent Jett, members of the board. There are actually two action They are really very interconnected, so I'm going to explain both of them at once, and then it will just require 2 votes. So you might recall from the last meeting, we presented some comparative information on area lunch prices, and the board had voted to approve meal prices. After the fact, actually, as we were updating the handbooks, it came to our attention that the pricing that was used in the analysis that went to Board Finance Committee and what the recommendation was based off of didn't reflect the increase for 2021 that the board had approved last year. And so in looking at what our actual 2021 prices are, both administration and Board Finance Committee don't feel that an increase that was previously recommended would be something that they would be recommending based on where our prices are at currently compared to our surrounding districts. And so the first action item is to rescind the approval of those increases. The only exception to the increase that was recommended to continue to bring forward was the 5-cent increase to the elementary breakfast price, so that both the elementary and secondary breakfast prices are the same. Most districts have those prices aligned, so there's just one fixed breakfast price. So that recommendation is to continue with that. So the first action item is to rescind the overall increase that was previously approved, and then the second item is to approve the 5-cent breakfast increase just for elementary.
Okay. Al?
Go back to the last action item. Under lunch prices in the student handbook for 2021-22, under lunch prices, should we not add a line in there that says our policy for the 2021-22 school year is that all lunches are provided at no cost? Because we list the prices in there, but we aren't saying that there's no cost, and I think it may cause confusion. So do we need to amend for that? So can I make a, no? Monica said no?
You need to resend the motion first.
What's that?
You need to resend the motion first.
Well, we already passed it.
So we can rescind it.
Okay. You go right ahead.
I move to resend the motion approved in the last board meeting for milk prices increase.
Second. We're going to rescind this first,
Okay.
and then we're going to go and rescind the board policy and then read it out.
The handbook
Yes.
one,
Yes.
right? Okay. Okay, yep, following you. Okay, so I have a motion by Monica and a second by Al. Any further discussion on the motion to rescind the approval of the meal prices? Okay, Al, can you call roll?
Monica Segura Schwartz? Shannon Hawes?
Yes.
Al Dahlgren is yes. Scott Andreasen?
Yes.
Zach Dorholt? Natalie Ringsmuth?
Yes.
Thank you, Al. Okay, Monica, keep leading here. Are we moving on to pass the meal prices and then
Yes.
bounce back? Okay, so next I'm looking for a motion to approve the meal prices as discussed tonight for the 2021-2022 school year.
You can make the motion with the changes that you want to do. It's a completely new motion.
Well, this is the second item here. That,
Al wants to bounce back to the handbooks, correct? Yeah,
we can do that as soon as we're done with it.
yep, okay, so let's, sorry, tired. Do I have a motion and a
For the-
second to,
For action item D, the meal prices
Yes.
to adopt the meal prices for 2021-22 as proposed.
I second.
okay, so I have a motion by Al and a second by Monica. Al, can you call roll?
Can I ask a question first?
Yes, please.
So just so I'm clear, this is the same as last year except for the 5-cent increase in the elementary?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt, Natalie Ringsmuth,
No.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes?
Yes.
And Al Dahlgren is yes. Then we'll go back and we'll rescind the approval of the student handbooks for 2021-2022.
So hang in there, Monica. Are you fine with that? If Al makes a motion to rescind the handbooks, because he wants to add a sentence in there. Rescind the motion to approve the 2021-2022 student family handbooks, item B. Okay, Al?
That's-
Okay, so I have
Yes.
a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion by Al and a second by Scott. Is there any further discussion? Okay, Al, can you call roll?
Al Dahlgren is yes. Zach Dorholt, Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Now I would move that we adopt the 2021-2022 student handbooks with the inclusion in the lunch prices section of an explanation that all student meals will be provided at no cost this year for all students, with the exception of multiple meals. So the prices and things would only apply if students are having multiple meals, or you come up with the wording, I'm sure.
And is there going to be an explanation on why that is? Can there be something that says,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't include à la carte? Okay.
Yeah, the language will be forthcoming, but the explanation should be that there is no cost for lunches in the upcoming school year unless there's an exception to what we provide, and then the pricing schedule would apply.
Okay, and so now I'm looking for a second.
Should there be a reason why we're doing this? Second.
Because yes, Will, he answered that, but he said
Yes.
yes, because the state is, or because the federal government is providing the funding.
We're going to say that in the book then?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
fine.
Okay.
Madam Chair, before we call roll there, does it also need to be said that the policies are going to be looked at and aligned as well? Like if we're saying this, why aren't we also saying that the policies are going to be aligned in the handbook with the newly passed ones?
And we
You know
can
what you
add
said?
that.
Yeah, I would feel good about that.
That they'll look at them, and if there was any
Yeah, I
concern, they
know
were
that we'll
going to
look at
change
them,
them.
but
Yep,
if we're going to do this, we might as well just say both things that we
got
want.
it. Okay. So now I'm looking for a second.
Second.
Okay, any,
The motion was that we will approve the student handbooks for 2021-2022 with the inclusion of a section explaining the free lunches or the no-cost lunches for the upcoming school year and the reason, and also with the understanding that the administration will go back and look at the bullying policies and the medications policies and make adjustments to put them in alignment with each other,
if needed.
if
Correct.
needed.
And Natalie, you second that, correct? Any further discussion? Monica?
So my concern is that if we put that the meal prices are, that we don't need lunch, we're going to have issues without a further explanation about people that we need to have them free and reduced lunch. Is that a concern for you, Amy? Would that be a concern also? Would that be clear enough in the handbook?
I think that will be clear enough, especially because we have a whole campaign and process that we're working through in terms of that outreach to our families and our students about the importance of the application for benefits outside of just the meal piece. So I don't think that that's going to impact that negatively by having the verbiage in the handbook.
We also cross-reference it under like activities and parking. So we note that if you have qualified for free or reduced meals, that those are reduced fees as well. So there's additional cross-referencing throughout the handbook.
Any other discussion? Al, can you please call roll?
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt, Natalie Ringsmuth.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
And Al Dahlgren is yes.
Way to work together to get that done. Thank you, guys. Okay, next up, then, we have Board of Education Standing Committee reports. And first up, Al Dahlgren, Chair of the Finance Committee.
This one is going to be really fast. It should have been forwarded to everybody today, and it was a fairly long Finance Committee report. We met on May 27th, 2021. Al Dahlgren, Scott Andreasen, Amy Skellerud, Monica Segura-Schwartz, and Willie Jett. And the two items that we talked about, and I'm not going to go into any detail on them. First one was the 2021-2022 meal prices and the fact that we needed to rescind and then readopt. And the second item on our agenda was the preliminary budget, which will be gone through in detail shortly. So I'm not going to go into detail on either one of those. And that was it.
Thank you. That adjourns our Board of Education meeting for tonight at 7:14 p.m. And we are opening up the Board of Education work session. 3 items tonight. First up, we have the preliminary 2021-2022 budget presentation tonight by Amy Skellerud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Thank you, Chair Hawes. Printed copies for everyone, just because it's a lot easier when you're looking at numbers and spreadsheets with a lot going on to have a paper copy in front of you. So it looks like a huge book, and we are by no means going to go over every single page. So huge sigh of relief. We will go through all of the funds individually and look at the numbers. That's obviously the most important part of the budget. But I do want to highlight just a few things in the first half of the book. The first half of the budget book is really informational. There's a lot of comparative information. There's a lot of information about board policies that impact finance and budget, budget timeline, lots of trend information that compares to other districts and shows some multi-year information. So we're not going to go through all of that. Certainly, if you're looking through this after tonight, between now and the next board meeting where the actual budget is approved and you have questions, please feel free to reach out to myself and I can walk through that in more detail. The few pages that I am going to spend a little bit of time on the first page, page 3, just want to point out there is a number on page 3 that's highlighted. That is the per pupil funding amount. That is highlighted because we don't yet know what that will be for fiscal year 22. Since the legislature is into special session, our hope would be that that number is updated and the session is adjourned by the time we get to the next meeting for approval, and that would be updated. If that's not updated at that point, then we would change that page to reflect some sort of verbiage that's the 21 rate and that the 22 rate is not yet released. Page 4 is one that I do want to draw a little bit of attention to because this is one that we talk about every year and has a big budget implications for our district, is the special education cross subsidy. So we show a number of years, including the budget for 21-22. You'll notice if we look at the third to the bottom line there where it says funding shortfall, in 16-17, our funding shortfall was about 13.6 million. And then you'll notice for 2 years, it actually got better and decreased significantly down to just over 11 million. The reason for that was because if you recall from those number of years back, the old special education funding formula had that growth limit and we were under the growth limit. So as we started to move above the growth limit, we saw increased revenue and our special education cross subsidy actually go down for a few years. Unfortunately, now the growth limit is done. They've added special education cross subsidy reduction aid, which you'll see has caused it to somewhat level out. We're not seeing big $500,000 to $1 million increases year over year like we were 5-10 years ago. But by no means is the approximately $12 million cross subsidy getting any smaller. And the state has really indicated in previous legislative sessions that their goal, as of right now, is really not to eliminate districts' cross subsidies, but to keep them from getting bigger, knowing that just the sheer amount of funding that would be required to actually eliminate those cross subsidies for every district is not something that they have in terms of available funds. The next page, if we want to skip ahead to page 9. The top half of page 9 talks about enrollment. We know enrollment is the biggest driving factor in the school district budget and operations. About 81% of our general fund revenue is in one way or another driven by some sort of pupil-driven formula. The one thing I want to note, when we look at the 2020-21 budgeted, that is truly what was budgeted for 2020-21. So if you go to the second to the right column where it says the total, it says the total for our current fiscal year is 9,545 students. That's what was budgeted for this year pre-COVID. So that budget and enrollment projections would have been done before we knew what fall was going to look like, before we knew if we had any sort of enrollment loss, homeschool loss, things like that. Our actual, what we're projecting this year in terms of actual enrollment is really much closer to that 9,300 student mark that you see as our budget for next year. The hope would be that we gain from that, but we obviously always budget conservatively until we know that the kids actually come. The bottom half of this page is our revenue. And two things I want to point out on here. Number one, I always like to point out the property tax revenue is consistently around 6.5, right in that area, % of our total revenue, which is really a relatively small source of our funding. I think sometimes there's a misconception that the majority of our budget comes from property taxes, and that's really not the case. So just something I always like to reiterate. And then one other thing I want to note on this page is the state revenue compared to the federal revenue. So typically that state revenue is right around that 85% mark. That's pretty consistent year over year. And you'll see that's dropped closer to that 80% percentage for both of the years, and the federal is up. And the reason for that really is because of the CARES funding that we have, the federal funds that we have coming from the stimulus packages, and then also in 21-22 because of that loss of compensatory revenue. So now, in the interest of time, we are going to skip all the way to page 37. But again, if there's any questions on anything, feel free to reach out. Page 37, we start the financial section, which is really essentially what the board is approving. The board is approving the budget for each fund, giving the district that authority to spend. Page 38 is just a summary. We will go through each of the funds individually, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on page 38, but 38 is kind of the rolled up condensed version of the budget. This is how you will see it kind of rolled up and summarized when it comes forward for approval at the next meeting. This is also how you would see it presented in the annual financial statements. On page 40, then breaks out the general fund. So the general fund is where the fund where the primary operations of the district are accounted for, and the general fund is actually comprised of three separate components. There's the general operating fund, the transportation fund, and then the operating capital fund. So again, when we go to do the audit in the fall, we don't ever look at those funds broken out like this, other than at budget time. Those all get condensed in. And for the state's purposes, if you hear the state refer to general fund, it's all three of those combined. We like to show the detail broken out, even though the state doesn't require it, just because it's a better way to kind of track the operations year over year in those areas. So if you flip then to page 41 is the bulk of the district's budget, the operating fund portion of the general fund. In the revenue section, again, we talked a little bit about that shift in revenue between state and federal, but you'll also notice that the revenues, just in terms of sheer dollars, are significantly higher than what we would have had in 2019-20, and that is due to those CARES funds, the ESSER funds, the CRF funds, funds that we received through the county. In terms of how much of those funds are represented in the budget, in 2020-21, there's about $6 million in budgeted federal funds, and in 2021-22, the budget has about $2.75 million, and that budget for 21-22 is primarily funding those positions that would have been paid for out of compensatory funds previously, with that loss of compensatory revenue. And then beyond that, there's some amounts that are budgeted for furniture and technology. And so, of course, if the revenues are increased, the expenditures are increased, because anytime we add budget for federal programs, the revenues and the expenditures really just offset each other. The one other thing I want to point out on this page, if you look at the 1920 actual column, that fund balance at the end of the year, so about 5 lines up there from the bottom, our fund balance was about 18.4 million at the end of 2019-20. Part of that large increase in fund balance last year was that transfer from LTFM, because we didn't have those projects last spring with everything being shut down. And at the time the board approved that transfer, the intention was that we thought we were going to need that $1.25 million for operational costs this year, because that was before we knew about any of the federal assistance funds. So you'll notice that although we had originally said that we expected that fund balance to then drop back down in 2021, we're expecting that fund balance to maintain through the end of this year. So that's fortunate that we had other funding and didn't have to tap into those reserves. Pages 42 through 44 are really just the expenditure portion of the operating fund broken out into detail. And so those different programs are set by state, so we don't dictate how we classify and what programs we report things in. The state mandates that reporting. However, sometimes there's shifts in how they have things coded. So one example I'll give, under the district support services, which is the second section on page 42, you'll see a line called Administrative Technology Services that had $0 for expenditures, and all of a sudden, starting in 2019-20, has $1 million. That by no means indicates that we added $1 million worth of programming. It was a new program code that the state determined that they were going to add, that really just shifted expenses from another program code, which is actually on the bottom of page 43, in instructional support. So sometimes it becomes hard when you look at the comparative information by program, because the state is constantly changing their mind, essentially, about how they want things coded. And then sometimes internal programming shifts how we code things. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through all of these, because obviously there's a lot here. But if there is a number or something that jumps out to you as being concerning or looks odd, or is just something that you're interested in, certainly let me know. The other thing that I do want to point out in this section, also on page 42, the very last line there under regular instruction is our extracurricular activities. And so you'll see that there is a big jump there over the last few years, particularly going into the 2021 school year. And that's really a function of those extracurricular student activity accounts moving under board control. So now that that activity is under the board control, we see those expenditures increase based on the annual spend in those accounts. Pages 43 and 44, I'm not going to point out too much. The only things I do want to note, there's a few lines under instructional support services, in educational media and instruction-related technology, which are at the very bottom of page 43. You'll see some big numbers there in 2021 and 21-22 relative to what you would normally see in a typical year. And again, those are CARES COVID-related expenses with a lot of the devices that we purchased, and some classroom technology purchases that are budgeted for next year. And then also in other pupil support services on page 44. Again, those are COVID-related expenses. That pupil support services is where we would pick up any of those nursing expenses that were COVID-related, or any food service type expenses that may have come out of those funds. Are there any questions on the operating fund or the general fund expenditures on here before we move on to the other funds?
Scott?
We had about a $7 million increase in federal money, and you indicated that those were pretty much met in expenditures. I see that some of that is related to the pupil support services, and another big hunk of it was related to technology, instructional related technology. Where did the rest of it go?
So it's really scattered throughout. Those are the biggest portions. Some of that was used for staffing, and so a lot of that's in regular instruction. Because of the enrollment decline this year, we would typically have adjusted numbers of sections and reduced staff, but as we were trying to add K2 sections and be able to socially distance students, we kept all of the staff that we had budgeted and had planned for, even though the number of students had decreased significantly. So there's a big portion kind of buried in that large elementary instruction number. There's some insights in buildings for PPE and cleaning materials. So it's really all over the place. But the technology and those devices, particularly for the elementary students, are such a big number that that number really jumps off the page compared to prior years, whereas the other numbers aren't really as noticeable because it's really spread out all over the place.
Al?
Amy, there's a couple on here that are a little concerning. One is music. It's dropped consistently and by 20% over the years listed. And I'm wondering if that is correct, and it's not going to art, so it's not being picked up there. Where is it being picked up?
And some of that is going to be a shift, as you recall, and I don't remember what year it was, where we phased out the elementary orchestra. And so that would have resulted in a decrease that year. Some of that also, when you have a small budget like that, can be dependent upon staff. So as we have higher paid elementary FTE retire and they're replaced with a lower paid teacher, when you have a line item that's, a relatively small portion of the budget, little changes like that can impact that trend line more so than it would in elementary education where you have $18 million worth of expenses. And so some of that is program related. Some of it is just particular people and turnover. And some of it also you'll notice across departments is reflective of the decline in enrollment. So it's not just music that's gone down, but a number of programs that have gone down just because enrollment is going down. And you don't necessarily see the decline in the regular elementary education for 21-22 because we have one-time purchases out of CARES money showing up in that program code. So sometimes it's better in those small areas to look at actual FTE, which again have decreased slightly. We talk about those FTE changes every year when we do the staffing process. But overall, in terms of FTE, there really hasn't been that significant decline like the dollars reflect.
And the difference between elementary education at 17 million and secondary education at 6,800?
So secondary education is a little bit skewed because the only thing that shows up in the secondary education line are positions that don't have a specific state mandated code to use. So if you keep going down, there's specific codes for math, science, natural science. Those are all secondary.
Okay.
We don't, with the exception of physical education, music, and art. So those would all be K-12 because they all fall into that program code. With the exception of those, all of those math and science and other kind of program-specific areas are secondary expenses. What shows up on the secondary education line is kind of anything else that doesn't fit into another program code. So a lot of those, if we have those life skills courses, some of those things, or a lot of our curriculum resources, if we're buying textbooks and supplies, those end up in 211 because they're not necessarily allocated just to one area.
And then gifted and talented going from 460 down to 170?
Yeah, and I looked at that after we went to board finance. That again is one of those shifts in internal coding that really wasn't intentional. The number of positions that we've had over the years has actually increased. Some of those positions, however, are funded out of our achievement and integration plan, which shows up in a different program code. The others, and I don't know at what point the shift was made in the coding, used to be getting coded there and are now getting coded to regular instruction. I actually made a note, we can't go back and change 1920 or prior, but I've made a note as we close out the 2021 audit and as we move forward, to move those ones that aren't part of the AI budget into the appropriate program code for gifted and talented so that our expenses will better reflect what we're actually spending on that programming. So as we sit here next year at this time, you'll see that change reflected.
Scott?
Yeah, under the music, we're in the process of adding a third orchestra room at Apollo. Is that reflected here?
So that is actually coming out of bond proceeds. So any expenditures that are construction related typically wouldn't show up in the general fund. That would show up in the capital fund. And then all of the capital fund expenditures get reported in sites and buildings because it's an improvement to sites and buildings. So any sort of physical improvements to a building, regardless of the department, that could be applicable to fax or tech ed or any of those, you wouldn't see those facility improvements show up in the program code. The program codes are really for the operational side of things.
Yes, but this change in facility is going to require another teacher or something like that. That should be showing up in this portion.
So the teachers are already there. It's a scheduling issue with them sharing space. So it's not that we've added a program or added a teacher. We've just given them the appropriate space that they've needed so that they're not having to share rooms and try to make a schedule work with shared spaces. Any other?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we will then flip to page 45. 45 is the transportation fund, again, part of the general fund. The two things that I'll note, in the 2021 budget, you'll see a revised budget that actually reflects a deficit. This was due to some bus purchases that had been planned and budgeted in 1920, and then those purchases weren't made in the spring because of the shutdown and everything with COVID, and so those budgets, that purchase shifted to this year. And so we had an increase in fund balance in 19 and 1920 as we didn't make some of those purchases. And so it's really spending down that part of that $800,000 fund balance that is sitting in the transportation fund. You'll also see a pretty big jump in expenditures from 1920 to 2021, and that's really just due to the increase in rates plus the increase in contracted routes. And again, expecting an increase in 21, 22 as well. The good news with transportation is that generally as our expenditures increase, particularly as our special education expenditures increase, we do see revenue coming in from the special education revenue funding formula to cover some of that cost increase. And then the last part of the general fund budget is the operating capital budget, which is on page 46. Again, you'll see a revised 2021 budget that reflects a deficit. That is coming from two things. The first was the board had approved spending those proceeds from the sale of Wilson, which is part of the operating capital reserves, towards the purchase of the Katherine Johnson Education Center building. And then also $200,000 of the deficit was purchasing next year's devices early so that we could ensure that those would get here before school starts. And then you'll see in 2021 a corresponding surplus. That surplus in operating capital is that $200,000 that is coming from the devices. However, there were some negative levy adjustments related to LTFM and lease levy from prior years that are offsetting that, which is why we see that the ending bottom line being a surplus of about $170,000 as opposed to the $200,000 that we would have expected otherwise. Are there any questions on transportation or operating capital before we move on? So moving on to special revenue funds, and we'll skip to page 49, because 48 really just summarizes the current year, whereas pages 49 and 50 show our multi-year comparison. We have two special revenue funds, food service and community service. The food service fund is on page 49. Overall, you'll see a pretty significant decrease in both revenues and expenditures. That's reflecting just a decrease in the amount of meals served, partly due to enrollment decline, partly due to students who may have been in Distance Learning Academy this year and didn't pick up meals. We always budget and staff from the most conservative standpoint, so our initial budget will be based on how many meals we serve this year, and then we would adjust that as we have better information. The one thing that that I do want to point out in the 21-22 budget in the revenue section is that really the revenue has shifted all to federal for next year. With the federal summer program, we don't receive any of that state funding. And then, of course, the sales revenue goes away with the exception of a small amount. There is $57,000 budgeted there. That's the revenue that we would expect to receive for adult meals, as well as our catering contract with some of the non-public schools. So we provide meals to some of the non-public schools. That is budgeted for next year to continue that. And then page 50 is the Community Education Fund. Slight decreases in both revenue and expenditure as some of those funding sources are tied to enrollment. So as we see enrollment go down, we see some of that go down, but really no major shifts. The Community Education Fund is kind of the one fund where we don't see a lot of COVID or CARES funding related changes. It's pretty much business as usual with, like I said, the small decreases just based on the revenues going down slightly. Are there any questions on food service or community service? Page 52 is the Capital Projects Fund. We will expect to see this fund probably in a year or two close out from all of the current year activity. The 21-22 budget has no revenue. Interest rates are relatively low and we don't have a lot of funds remaining, so we aren't budgeting any significant revenue coming in. And the $2.1 million that's budgeted for expenditures is those projects that the board previously approved to use the remaining funds for. At the very bottom, you'll see in 21-22 that there's still a fund balance projected at the end of the year. I just want to point out that is not bond proceed fund balance. That's not anything from the tech bond. That is actually still old remaining proceeds from the core review certificate of participation. That money needs to get moved to a debt service escrow account. Those funds by law have to be used only for that purpose. They can't be reallocated or repurposed for anything. And so we're still working with our bond councils to get that debt escrow opened up and transferred. And so that will happen as part of the 2021 audit. And then we'll see that those remaining funds go away. Page 54 is the debt service fund. Very straightforward. We really have very little input into the budget. The levy is set based on 105% of the principal and interest payments. And then if we collect more than what we need, the state comes in and does what they call a debt excess adjustment, which is why you'll see our revenue going down next year, just because we've collected more than we need to make those minimum payments. And so then they take that back in future years. Starting then on page 56, or on page 56 is our trust fund. This fund will no longer have activities, so it'll stay in the budget book until the prior year information drops off a number of years from now. But you might recall from the audit last year, this was, again, a state mandated change where the scholarship activity, because it wasn't actually governed by any sort of formal legal trust, is reported in the general fund. And so the 19-20 actual, you see what was sitting in the trust fund basically gets moved to the general fund. That was part of last year's audit. So the activity is still there, it's just in the general fund now. Page 50, actually we'll skip to page 59. We have three internal service funds. The first is our Oped trust fund. really these funds are sitting kind of in reserve for a rainy day if we ever need them to help out the health insurance fund. And the annual activity is more so an accounting adjustment that we're required to make to show, to book revenue and expense for insurance claims related to retirees. It's not, there's really no actual money coming in or money going out. It's really just a very complicated accounting rule that requires us to report the information. But the bottom line net position or fund balance is there if we ever need it for the health insurance fund. There's some restrictions on how much you can transfer in a year based on an actuarial that gets done. But you'll see when we get to the health insurance fund that at this point, we don't need it to transfer, but we may someday.
Could you please define an OPED fund?
So the OPEB fund is other post-employment benefits. So this fund was started a number of years ago. I think it was probably over 10 years ago now, when the district issued bonds to help cover what's considered other post-employment benefits, which is basically severance or paying for post-retirement health care benefits. So at one point, there was money in the fund when the proceeds were issued. A number of years back, I think it was in 2017, when we had the large enrollment decline, we were able to, and we had the shortfall in our health insurance fund. At that time, we had a large amount in this fund, and we were able to transfer that to the health insurance fund to cover that deficit and kind of get us to a clean slate going forward. And so it's really a holding place for those funds. There's really no activity. There would never be any new money coming in. It will sit there until we use it, and then it will go away.
But that money initially came from districts statewide had overcommitted to paying post-retirement benefits, and they allowed school districts to bond for that overpayment. And so it was bonded for, and then each year we would draw off of it based on the number of retired. There was a gap for healthcare costs between teacher retirement or administrator retirement, and then when they were able to not use paid health insurance, so I would imagine it was Medicare, would have kicked in, so that gap was covered in the old contracts. And so they allowed the funding for it, and this is the leftover, it's the remaining pieces, and I assume we have no retirees anymore? No workers in the district that are eligible for OPEB?
We don't, there may be, I think, 2 administrators still floating out there who haven't hit the Medicare age, but it's minimal. It by no
We
means.
have to hold enough for that, and then, but then the rest. Is the only thing that it can be used for health insurance?
Yes. Yep. But we can use it, so we can indirectly use it for the health insurance fund to cover what they call the implicit portion of our premiums, because we allow retirees to stay on our plan, even though we don't fund their premium after they retire. The fact that they're staying on the plan kind of informally causes an increase in your health insurance costs, because you have, it increases your number of older plan members. So that's why it can be used for our current health insurance fund, even though it's not directly paying the premiums for the retirees. It's to cover what they call that implicit portion of the expense. The next page, page 60, is our second internal service fund. That's the dental insurance fund. With both the dental and the health insurance on the next page, you'll notice in the 2019-20 actual expenses that they're significantly lower. And that's just due to the fact that we had very low claims from March to June of last year, because everything was shut down, which was great. It helped us build some additional reserves. Both of these funds are sitting at about 7 to 7.5 months of claims and reserves, which is great. And if you flip to page 61 and look at where our health insurance fund was 5 years ago in 2015-16, that's really exciting news for our employees and for the district. that we've been able to build up a healthy reserve in that short amount of time. It really allows us to keep those premium increases for employees to a minimum. And so at the end of 2019-20, we were sitting at about 8.9 million in reserve, and we're expecting that to increase slightly in 2021 as well. And then starting in 21-22, we're expecting that claim volume to get back to normal. Are there any questions on any of the internal service funds? The last part of the book is the informational section. We already talked about enrollment, which is page 63, so I'm not going to go over that. It just shows it more by grade. When we looked at it in the front portion of the book, it kind of had it condensed. This is a more detailed breakout. So if there's questions on that, again, feel free to ask. Page 64 is our levy comparison, showing 5 years of levy. Overall, over the 5 years, our levy has decreased. And even in the few years where the dollar amount of the levy increased, the actual tax rate still went down because of that overall tax capacity increasing. So from a tax standpoint, the district has continued to approve levies that are favorable to our taxpayers. And then the last page we can look at is page 65. This is our 5 years of staffing levels, actuals for the first 4 years, and then our projected, what our budget is based off of for 21-22. Very consistent. The only real noticeable shift is between teachers and paraprofessionals. We know we can't hire paraprofessionals. We, at the end of this year, I believe, had about 50 open positions, which we know doesn't serve our students or our staff well to have positions on paper that we can't fill. And so we've converted some of those paraprofessional positions to clerical positions within the special education department, as well as licensed teachers, to try to provide that support in other ways that we can staff. And so you'll see the paraprofessional number of employees go down, and then some of those other categories go up. But really outside of that, the staffing is very consistent from this year to next year. And then the last 4 pages are just our bond schedules, and we don't need to look at those.
A lot of the paraprofessionals going down is because of fewer students.
Just because of the difficulty in staffing those positions. And so even with the change in staffing and shifting the funds from some of those positions to covering new licensed positions, so we've added clerical positions and added additional teachers. Even with that, we still have a lot of openings for next year that will be a challenge to fill. So it's really not student-driven. It's really the main driving force is the ability to fill those positions.
Same problem the business community is having with the lesser skilled occupations.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say it's, about it being a lesser skilled occupation. It's just they're very can be challenging positions, and there's so many of them. And it's really hard with all of our positions that are 10-month positions. We have the same challenge with bus drivers and nutritional services because you don't have that employment in the summer. It becomes a lot harder to compete with other industry where people have that guaranteed 12 months of income. We just really don't have that ability to provide all of our staff any sort of summer work opportunity. And so that really is our biggest challenge with filling and retaining those people.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, next up, we have Clark Field updates presented tonight by Willie Jett, Superintendent of Schools.
Chair, Chair Hawes, members of the board, as Amy's walking away, I forgot to hand her being that she gives such a thorough budget review and the discussion is always rich, I always have a surprise, it's an energy drink for Amy. So I forgot to bring that for you, Amy. I went to look for it, but they only had grape flavored, and I know that's not what you're looking for. Okay. So with that, the purpose of this Clark Field update, it's just basically to give a general overview. And so what I'd like to say is, in partnership with the city, the want by both parties is to be able to keep Clark Field a green space for the community, for our families, and for youth activities, et cetera. The city, and I'm going to get a little bit more specific, the city, the mayor, and the community development director, they've agreed to take ownership and make Clark Field part of their park system. And for some reason, I have this number of 19, and it feels like it's more than that, but I keep hearing the mayor talk about the number 19. What is of importance to us are the requests that we have for the city, and it's been an agreement that has been discussed for quite a while, is the ability to use Nina Creek Park. It's what's coming in the near future. It's the Whitney of the South. And so what's coming in the future is talking about softball fields, baseball fields, and soccer fields. And simply stated, it's the ability for us to have priority use in that or at that park for our after-school activities. And so the timeline that's been discussed for signing the, what am I trying to say, for signing the exchange, the city has talked about sometime this summer. They're not exactly sure. They're talking about late July. And we will bring that to the board finance before that. And we'd bring that to board finance as soon as possible. But that's just a quick rundown or update of Clark Field. I know that some of you have been, or many people have been reading about it in the St. Cloud Times, and discussion has been with WJON, and we've been attending meetings with Friends of Clark Field, and people have questions. But that agreement between the city and District 742, that was discussed during and prior to the referendum, and in terms of how that was going to be a nice partnership between the district and the city in terms of being able to use the Nina Creek Park. Questions?
Al?
That agreement will be put in writing for us to see, I would assume.
Correct.
And do you know how long of an agreement that will be with Nina?
We have not got specific. I mean, the way that in the general conversation between the district and the city, there was no discussion about that wouldn't be an ongoing, I'm not going to say forever, but because forever could be 100 years. But the conversation was that was going to be the partnership between the district and the city. And it was as if it was an open-ended conversation. So we can get that in writing.
Seems to me there would be an advantage to having, it could be a 30-year agreement or
okay.
something with a defined
Some meat.
commitment.
Yep, some meat.
Right, so there is actually an agreement there.
Okay.
And secondly, with the city, they would take over Clark Field. Do you know have any inkling of what their plans would be for that parcel? I would imagine that they wouldn't look at just leaving it exactly as it is, but I know there are some things in place that they cannot change.
So they have not shared in detail with us what they would like to do. So I'm not going to speak for them. I think they want to do that like at a city council meeting for them. What they've always let us know is they want to be able to use that as green space, to be able to use it for fields. And the thing they talk about is you have youth football going on there now, but they always get requests for soccer. And then they'd also like to be able to maybe, just a guess, I've, a little fly on the wall talking about that's a Summertime by George moment also, because it's real close. And so they're just talking about the ability to be able to put it to full use.
And one of the advantages for us would be when the city would take control of that property, it would eliminate our liability for anything that may happen on that property.
Correct.
And maintenance.
Maintenance.
The maintenance cost, and we do have a significant maintenance cost right now.
Correct.
In time and effort.
Correct.
Okay.
The use at Nina Creek, our ability to be able to use that property seems to far and exceed our ability to use the Clark Field property, correct?
Correct, without doubt. When you talk about lacrosse, soccer, just the location, in terms of our students being able to walk right to it, it's almost like an extension of the tech complex, and it has the potential to be magnificent.
Well, it seems like a win-win situation.
A win-win, definitely a win for us, definitely a win for the city, definitely a win for the community in terms of families and youth programs being able to use it.
Win-win-win.
Win-win-win.
Like it.
So Willie, one more. when we're looking for a crossing, we're going to have a crossing over the creek, the trout stream. And we would probably want to have some type of date and get an earlier start on that this time, because I would imagine we'll have to go through a lot of the similar permitting processes.
I remember those permitting processes, so thank you, Al. We will make sure that we start moving on that now.
Monica?
When is the Nina Creek going to be done?
That's a city project, and so they have not committed a timeline for that for us. When tech was being completed, they told us that they were hopefully going to have that done within a 5-year span upon the tech completion date. But with the things that have happened in the past year or so, that might be delayed a little bit. Just like I know there was a delay in is it 33rd Street? Yeah, in the expansion of things. So I'm just anticipating that they're trying to do some things there.
Monica?
Do we know when are they going to be moving into the tech building? Or we don't know that either?
Oh, that was in a newspaper. They're talking about doing that before the end of this year.
If you drive by, you can see stuff going on. Okay. Appreciate the update.
You're welcome.
All right, last up for tonight, school updates presented by Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Perfect. Good evening again. It is my honor to share with you the celebrations that took place in our school communities last week. Many of you were at many of the events, and it was nice to see you, some of you 5 days in a row for last week. And so just like for the entire year, it took a village to celebrate the hard work and accomplishments. So thank you to this board, to our school community, and to our community partners for showing up for our students and our staff last week and making those possible. We have so much to be proud of after this year of challenges, that tonight we are going to have a peek at how every single building and every single school in our district celebrated the end of the year. We're going to start with our preschool and elementary. So here you have early childhood. Our early childhood students celebrated the last week of school with a picnic and fun outdoor activities with family members. The 4-year-old preschool students will be members of the class of 2034. Doesn't that make you feel old? Woo. And are excited for, maybe just me, but it makes me feel old, and are excited for kindergarten this coming fall. Clearview students celebrated the end of the year with bubbles. High fives from Cody, of course, he was a fixture throughout the year, and waves from the bus. Here you can see 3 photos from Discovery's end of the year. The first photo is the student winners of their walkathon, and they got to put a pie in the face of a favorite Discovery adult. Our second photo is Spring Empower Learning. Huda Ibrahim was our author visit, and Huda spoke of the importance of reading and literacy to our students and parents at Discovery. And the last photo, you can see our principal, Becky Estrada, being slimed along with a teacher. Students were challenged to meet their personal star growth goals from fall to spring for a chance to pour on the slime, and clearly they made their goals. Kennedy will be featured twice since they have our PK through 8th grade students. So here is the elementary slide. You can see our K-5 students participated in an end-of-year carnival where they worked in collaboration with their classmates for a day of fun. Our Madison students worked relentlessly. Our Madison staff worked relentlessly this year to help students feel welcome and make sure that they felt like they belonged. And they took time to celebrate. Students and staff celebrated the principal's, he says, 25th birthday by having an all-school Hawaiian day, and we ended the year by celebrating the 5th graders with a fond farewell. Our year at Lincoln wrapped up with sharing gratitude with one another. And those, the cards that you see were written by students for the nutritional services team. A school-wide virtual talent show. You can see a photo of our students watching that talent show. And in-person 5th grade graduation farewell ceremonies for families of each of our 5th graders, along with an always tearful goodbye from staff at the bus line. For pictures for Oak Hill, you can see in the pictures that they had a wonderful end of year outdoor celebration despite a bit of rain. Their celebration included painting the principal's hair and watching him try to stay dry in the dunk tank. The umbrella did not stop a few kindergartners from coming up and just pushing the button if they missed the target. We've taught them well. The other pictures you can see are from the 5th grade graduation. We held 2 sessions and to ensure that our celebration was also safe and healthy. And you can see a few students who really dressed up for the occasion. And Principal Rivard, soon to be Assistant Superintendent Rivard, would like you to know that the Oak Hill family is proud of everything our students accomplished this year. Our Tulahi students celebrated spring and new life through a school-wide butterfly project. Each class raised painted lady butterflies and then released them. Students also celebrated success with an end-of-year carnival featuring bubbles. Apparently bubbles are very popular with the elementary set. Sidewalk chalk, yard games, dancing, and a running race in cooperation with our partners, the St. Cloud Police Department. Officer Larson, who is one of our school resource officers assigned to Tulahi, attended with a speed detector to track students' running speeds. Our 1 student per grade was the recipient of a bicycle provided by Horace Mann Insurance. Students in the drawing were recognized for showing pack pride through respectful, responsible, and safe behaviors. At Westwood, you can see our Math Olympiad champions featured. Their talent development specialist runs enrichment programs, and the students are here. You can see the winners who competed in the math competition. Their first place winner was also the champion in 4th grade, and that was Vivian Wilson. Congratulations to Vivian. The St. Cloud Fire and Rescue came to visit our kindergarten students in May. They talked with students about fire safety, and the students got to tour the fire truck, always popular. 5th grade graduation was a wonderful event held at the last day of school, and it was a beautiful day outside to honor and acknowledge the hard work of our 5th grade graduating students. You can also see photos from the PBIS Street Dance, which is held yearly for our students as a celebration for following the Westwood Way throughout the year. All grade levels and students participated in the dance with music and friends. Moving on to our middle schools. And here you can see Kennedy featured. Our 8th grade students graduated, showed off their puff quilts that they made, and staff wished them well. The 6th through 8th grade students also participated in an activity day filled with escape rooms, dodgeball, a medallion hunt, minute to win it games, and much more. On their last Tuesday and Wednesday in school, Norse students read A Mall Unbound for their One Building, One Book event. Students and staff celebrated on these days with root beer floats. North staff took time to celebrate clerical and SEL staff members who have summer birthdays. A tradition among North office and SEL staff is to have the person celebrating for their birthday wear a fancy crown. On the final day of school, Principal Nutter posed for photos with students and staff, declaring they had officially made it through the school year. And I bet that was a good feeling. At South Junior High, they also ended their school year by reading a book, and the book they read was Fish in a Tree, a story about how everyone is smart and unique in different ways. Several guest readers got in the action to read aloud the entire story over the course of 2 days. It was a great note to end a challenging year on. You can see the 8th grade class pictures. They didn't get to do their big 8th grade group picture, so a collage would have to do as they went classroom to classroom during their 8th grade spring fling on May 21st. And Principal Heitkamp would like to take a moment to wish our 8th graders all the best as they embark on their high school journey and thank everyone for being a part of the South family. We will miss each of you. And finally, there's a collage of photos from the Run Like a Tiger 5K. So students, staff, and families gathered together virtually on May 23rd to run, walk, bike, rollerblade, all to fundraise in support of the South Learning community. Moving on to our high schools. Here you can see that our students who are in the EPIC course and welding classes combined to test their rocket stoves that they made by making grilled cheese sandwiches. They work. They worked. You can also see photos from the parade, which many of you were at, the rock that the senior class painted, and of course, a photo from graduation. At Tech, their morning show celebrated and showcased student voice and work, as well as keeping their community in the know. Senior spring celebrations included a scholarship night, a parade featured here, and of course, graduation. You can also see in the bottom left, the Habitat for Humanity has a completed home is there. The Big Build Community Project successfully built a home for a local family. The students learned skills that will take them well beyond the classroom, as well as contributed back to our St. Cloud community. And Principal Harris would like to say congrats to the class of 2021. And finally, our alternative programs. This year, McKinley ALC hosted the first day prom for students and staff. It was a very cool event, and the live DJ was awesome. This year, Student Council played a tremendous role in designing and implementing our day prom, as well as giving student feedback about the school climate. You can also see students who are helping keep their community safe and celebrating by individually wrapping cookies to distribute. They also did a graduation ceremony, and it was live streamed so that folks who could not come were also able to attend and celebrate their McKinley graduate. The month of May at Riverwoods was spent enjoying our students. We planned many activities that kept our students engaged. They read the Red Kayak. They engaged in many activities. They had a basketball week, a track and field week. They did a site cleanup, planter decorating contest, and a staff versus student volleyball game, though we do not know who won. We'll have to find out from Brenda. We ended our last day with a celebration acknowledging their 8th grade graduates. At Roosevelt Education Center, they were also very busy. Their elementary students took a trip to Hemker Park and Zoo. They did an all-school tie-dye project, and of course, they celebrated as well. There are students who are graduating. You can see those students in the bottom right corner. So all in all, it was a very busy week as we celebrated the hard work that was done by our students and staff. And again, thank you to our entire community for making a very
Any comments? Good. Okay, that adjourns our board work session. It is 8:11 p.m. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back on Wednesday, June 16th. Have a good night.